Hello and welcome to the TTS Talking Outdoor Spaces webinar. Now, throughout this session, I'll be talking to a global panel of experts to explore all the fantastic learning opportunities the great outdoor offers. Now, who am I? My name is Steve Bollar, also known as Stand Tall Steve, and I'm an educational thought leader, former superintendent of schools, principal, and author. I am so delighted to be the host of today's TTS Talking webinar, Exploring Outdoor Spaces. Now, joining me today, as I said, we have some experts who will be bringing their experience, insights, and understandings to the surface to bring you practical guidance, tips, and solutions to inspire your approach to take learning outdoors. So first up is Professor Stephen Heppell. Now, Stephen holds the Felipe Segovia Chair of Learning Innovation at UCJC in Madrid. Now, his work in the field of learning environments means that Stephen has extensive knowledge of how environmental conditions affect children's learning. Stephen, welcome.
Buenos dias.
So next up, we have Dr. Tim Holmes. Now, Tim is an award-winning educator and neuroscientist. Throughout Tim's career, he's developed and implemented neuroscience programs for various academic and commercial customers. Dr. Tim, glad to have you.
Great to be here.
Very good. And next up, we have Catriona Woodward. Now, Catriona is a passionate international educator. She's held a range of leadership positions in schools across the globe and most recently joined the Real School in Budapest as co-designer and lead educator. Hello, Catriona.
Hello, happy to be here.
Excellent. And wrapping up our panel, we have James Clarke. Now, James is the design director at Space Oasis, responsible for their value engineered capsule collection, Learniture, which is with over 30 years of experience in furniture industry. James has extensive knowledge and experience in the furnishing of practical learning spaces. James, how are you today?
It's good to be here, Steve.
Excellent. Well, hey, let's get into this, gang, all right? It's really great to have all of you on the panel. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and all of your perspectives. Now, I wanted to first start by discussing the importance of taking children's learning outdoors to begin with and all the benefits of doing that. So let's go to Steve. Steve, you're going to kick this one off for us. How can outdoor learning opportunities improve social, emotional, and physical well-being?
Yeah, golly gosh, Steve, it's a big topic, but everybody watching this will remember probably as a kid, having that magical moment when they got taken out of doors on a hot summer's day and, and wow, we're outside and it was a special moment. There's a whole heap of reasons why that felt so good. Some of it is about the quality of the air. You put 30 kids in a box and shut the door, and their CO2 goes up, and they're gassing themselves with their own emissions, and the temperature is probably wrong. Certainly I'm sitting in a room here with carpet tiles all around, solvent for the carpet tiles, volatile organic compounds are wafting up into the room. I can smell it here, and there's none of that's good for your brain. And plus the humidity and the light levels are wrong, and the sound kind of bounces around in the room, and all that's conspiring to stop you, Steve, being, your best possible self. So when we take that out of doors, things are better. And it's not just a summer's day, famously the people doing outdoor learning always say, no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. Now, where you are, you've got an ice storm sweeping through tonight. So there are moments when you want to keep indoors. But by and large, kids are pretty resilient in terms of weather, and they get out there and they get learning. And that's a big part of it. You can fix some of those things in the room. If the CO2's too high, loads of people watching will be on BYOP, bring your own plant. You bring one plant in per kid. Good old Mother Nature does the job of photosynthesis, slurping up the CO2, pumping back the oxygen. And NASA, giving us a list of plants because they're off to Mars and they're taking a load of plants with them because how else they're going to breathe up there. So we know how to do this well, but when we get out of doors, the numbers just go through the roof.
Let me jump over to Dr. Tim. What are the environmental effects on attention, learning, and memory?
Yeah, well, I want to pick up on some points that Stephen's made, but first of all, I'm still trying to get that image of kids gassing themselves with their own emissions out of my head. So he's absolutely right about the quality of air and the quality of light. These both feed into optimizing performance of the brain. So attention is something that we need to apply whenever we're learning something new. The brain loves to do stuff on autopilot, right? It loves to just like get things into an automatic state. And it does that to allow it to learn new stuff, to free up resources to do that. But one of the resources that's absolutely critical to that is oxygen. It's one of the key signals that we use when we're actually studying the brain to see what functionality has been going on, what areas of the brain have been actually, when people say lighting up, it's usually looking at the amount of oxygen that has been taken out of the blood by a region of the brain during the performance of some kind of task. And so this importance of good quality air, and particularly oxygen, is crucial to the process of paying attention, which is the gateway to memory. It's the gateway to learning. And if you can facilitate that, then we know you're going to have a better outcome. We know the recall is going to be better. We've all seen that situation where you're talking to a room full of people, usually after lunch, right, when the room's gotten a bit stuffy, everyone's a bit tired, and the body's processing other things, and the attention will drift off, and this can happen simply because of a lack of good quality air in the room. We tend to get sleepy. We tend to lose that focus that we associate with sort of good quality engagement when learning something. Stephen also mentioned about light. There's a reason why these days we try to bring as much natural light into the classroom as possible, and the same with office spaces and a lot of retail spaces as well, because light actually feeds the process. We know that people will learn better. This has been shown repeatedly in studies that the brain will function better with natural light. Vitamin D is a crucial part of that. And that doesn't just play into the learning process, it plays into the well-being of the students, because happy students are almost certainly going to learn better, and they're certainly going to be more enthusiastic about the process of learning, about actually engaging with a topic. They'll be excited to do it. And I think this is why we all have these fond memories of going outside, because it almost brings the play element into learning, right? It feeds the way that we naturally learn.
Catriona, I'm sure you're at a school. You see this all the time, I'm sure. I see you're smiling. Tell me something. This is what you're seeing with the students that you have?
Yeah, I was just listening actually to what Tim was saying there, and I was really relating to this from a classroom perspective. For example, asking a student to do nature-based poetry, for example, but some of those children have never actually had the experience that we expect them to write about. So it's so crucial for their learning and for their own experiential experience to take them outdoors and to have that idea where you can sit by the bank of a river, you can tangibly touch something, you can take in the smells, you can look at the direction of the water flow, and that experience in itself is going to start to be more clear on paper. It's going to be able to get them to really think about those words that they want to use to clarify that experience that they've had out there. And it's not quite often we use this just for younger children. I'm an early years practitioner by nature, and it's really interesting because to me, outdoor learning was so prevalent in my practice when I was working in the younger year groups, because we were always going outside, let's go and find something, let's go and touch something, let's do leaf rubbing, let's make nature crowns out of leaves. And actually those experiences that they have at an early age with an outdoor learning space or an outdoor experience, it gives them an opportunity to really want to take care of nature because it's so important in their daily practice in the classroom. But actually, what I found recently is that this doesn't stop at only the children in the early years. It can be brought into children in the secondary classes as well. So, for example, we were doing a novel study on Lord of the Flies, and so we took them out to the nearby forest, to the island, and we gave them a scenario. You know, you're actually in the book, and let's recreate chapters 1 to 4. You know, you're going to be with these people. What resources would you have here? And a big part of outdoor spaces, it gives you that opportunity to move around, make those big spaces, use drama, to really create a sense of understanding of the story, which I think is really important for all learners, but particularly learners that don't speak English as a first language, to be able to kind of try to understand the sense of the story from their own experiences as well.
Yeah, so Catriona, I mean, that's we have a lovely, you'd adore this, a little early years thing in the town I live in. We have a beach school. I live on the coast, beachschool.org. And the little kids who are completely immersed in the flora and fauna of where they live. You know, they're in the mud looking for the babies. They like to get in the mud, looking for the baby crabs there. And because they're there all the time, they really, really have a handle on the seasons and they can tell you when the jellyfish are or aren't in. They can say, hey, everything's 2 or 3 weeks later this year. Now, what's interesting about that is walking past are quite a lot of old folk, you know, it's by the coast, and the old oyster fisher folk who've got such a wealth of knowledge of the place, but nobody's ever thought to involve them in learning before. But now they're saying, oh yeah, well, let me show you. If you turn the crab over, there's a triangle, that's a boy crab, or yeah, but look at this oyster, it's got a flat side, it's a native oyster. There's a wonderful reaffirmation of community knowledge that comes because the kids are out in the community.
But one of the things that you mentioned, or that Tim mentioned, was about movement. And we know whenever we're designing a learning space, we're looking at what the research is telling us. And there's some fantastic empirical research that demonstrates the link between movement and cognition. So Dieter Breiteker's research, Chuck Hillman's research, where he sat people in front of a test after doing a 20-minute walk. Now, in classrooms, we're sort of trained to sit still and concentrate, whereas outdoors, as long as we're not simply recreating that classroom environment or trying to recreate a classroom environment outdoors, then in actual fact what we're doing is enabling that, or that element of movement becomes intrinsic and part of what we're doing, and as a consequence we know, add to the oxygen, add to the light, the movement, we're getting blood going around to the body, which is delivering that oxygen back to the brain. I mean, you know more than this than I do, Tim. But
I mean, I think it's really interesting that what Stephen and Catriona have sort of been touching on also is the multisensory aspect of this outdoor experience, right? And we know that memories they're more like a network, right? The more input there is, the more linkage that there can be created to memories, the better and the richer those memories will be for the kids. And so, more lines of sensory input, more variety of stimuli, being able to turn a crab over. It's not just looking at a picture in a book. You can actually explore it, and you can feel it, and you can smell it. And yeah, absolutely. So, and you see them in different stages of development. So you have all of this additional information that makes the learning so much richer.
Nobody ever says to a kid out of doors, sit up straight and don't fidget. I mean, so
they can try.
There's a physical thing going on here as well. That, if my body's moving, it pumps the blood around my body, the oxygen gets to my brain, and that's good for me. But we saw Chuck, that work from Michigan, Illinois University.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because the kids who wandered around before the test, you could see the brain activity dramatically. So, Tim, what would you say to people in the classroom who haven't got outdoors yet? How do you get them to move? What would you do to get that engine pumping and the oxygen coming up here?
How do you get them to move within a classroom environment?
Before they're allowed out,
Well, a little bit of that comes back to the types of furniture that we look at.
It does.
Yep.
Wobble stools and things like that actually just do promote a sense of movement. I mean, the thing that I've again find so interesting is the fact that the kids know it. I was doing some student engagement for a school in the south of France that we're working with, and we had a group of their student council, and the older students said there was something about primary school that we loved, and it stops when we go into secondary school. And that sense of play, that sense of not just sitting down, sit still in rows, etc., that they recognised suddenly their learning didn't become excited. I saw it when I ran the scout troop in our local town. Is I tried to do something in the hut and I struggled, and yes, admittedly I'm not a trained teacher, but I struggled to keep any sense of control. Take them outside, and that was where they naturally wanted to be, and suddenly we had engaged kids.
Yeah, we're going to come. We're going to come to some of the practicalities of outside as well. But
Yes,
Katrina,
definitely.
just be reassuring, Katrina, that when they're outside, they don't go mad. They're not running around out of control. They're kind of focused, aren't they, in a quite encouraging way, you know.
Well, I'm just saying, as an educator, hopefully you have some control of your class to begin with. So if you're going outside there, as much as you can't stay still and perfectly, focused, it allows you to have a little bit of control of your class. You're out there in the elements, and it's absolutely a wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much, everybody, for your insights in that specific area. Well, that brings us to the end of this part of the discussion. Next, we're going to be asking our panels for practical advice on how to encourage outdoor learning in a variety of ways. Okay, we are going to get practical, gang, right? We need to encourage outdoor learning activities, settings. So, Stephen, I'm coming to you first again. I'm interested for you to share your thoughts on encouraging outdoor learning in a variety of different contexts and settings.
Well, I mean, it's what we're not doing for sure is just taking the existing classroom and planting it outside. And I think we saw some horror pictures during the pandemic, kids sitting in playgrounds with square boxes painted around them. And whoa, what were they thinking, But kids outside are, can be quite autonomous. I mean, obviously, you can pair the kids up so you know where they are. Technology is your friend because you can contact them pretty easily. I like to have a good whistle, which really works pretty effectively. This is the loudest whistle in the world, 120 decibels. I won't blow it here. The tech crew will all fall off their benches, But, simple things. You've got to, how am I going to tell everybody to come back? You still need moments of direct instruction, full frontal teaching, So you've got to get them back for that. And I think if people imagined maybe when they were in their science labs at school, there's a moment when they say, come on up, and you'll come up to that key moment, sit around the teacher's bench, and this is sulfuric acid, don't drink it. Those really important things are, everybody captures it and off you go again. Zoning works well. We've got an outdoor school in a little chapel school in Essex. We built a wandering path all the way around the school. There are stations all the way along. And there's a numeracy station, there's a local culture station, and the kids have an activity sheet that's got 3 or 4 activities. And they choose which one they do. If they go to one and it's busy, they move on to another one. That encourages the movement anyway. And another simple thing is to put measurements all over the place. Kids are very under-numerate these days, and not a lot of number in their lives. They don't do change in the shops anymore. They don't give money on the bus. It's all done digitally or in some other way. So it gets quite interesting when you just paint numbers around the school. And I don't just mean so they get familiar with the numbers, but estimating how tall is the tallest tree, how high is that roof, how far is it from one side of the school to the other. And on the little phone you can do things like it's a free app, just measures how fast you run across the phone. So just looking for not just activity, but activity in data. Think about what they're doing, think about the places they do it, think about a carousel of activities that move them around, think about how you get them back, think about who's looking after who, and you can mix ages real good. A lot of schools, as you know, around the world are going for stage, not age now, so the kids are doing, if you're really good at this, you do it with the big kids because you can keep up with them. That works really well out of doors, whereas in the classroom, I've got to go and sit with the year 10s, that's scary. But out of doors, I'm with the year 10s.
And, and that goes a lot to the culture of your school. the climate and the culture of your school. If you're developing a school where it is a school of respect, it's a school of awareness, a school where they understand what respect and value, you can allow for those things to happen. And I love that example that you gave there, where it's like, you know what, take down the cones, develop that culture and climate where there's respect amongst each other, and then you can have those interactions with each other in the outdoor space. The other thing that really jumped out to me is how you were giving examples of how technology and the outdoor space can blend together so well. Just because you're outside doesn't mean that you're not plugged in, so to speak, to technology and the world around you. It can blend together as well. Catriona, you're in a school, as we know. What suggestions do you have for taking the curriculum outside? And I also want to hear from our other panelists some thoughts and ideas that you might have.
Sure. I mean, when it comes to what we're doing here, and actually what I've done in other schools in Asia as well, is it's about making sure that it's really embedded in your school practice. So, for example, it's quite commonplace for teachers to sit down and do a medium-term planning meeting about what we're going to be teaching for the next term. And there you have your kind of normal literacy, math, science. But we tend to kind of leave off there an outdoor learning box. And so my role has been to bring in an outdoor element to that goes throughout that term. So, for example, it could be we're super lucky here, we actually have in our curriculum a half day that's out for excursions. And that some principals might say like, well, but the learning, the maths and the literacy and the numeracy, but actually that learning is happening outdoors. So we're not jeopardizing a subject for this excursion day or half day. We're giving them an opportunity to learn within an external community. That could be going and interviewing people if they're doing a design sprint and getting some ideas about what the actual local community needs. It could be an idea of going to a local space and not necessarily having something that's super pre-planned, but actually about giving the students an experience so they can bring that experience back to the classroom when they come into doing a piece of writing, or maybe writing a song, or, for example, even maths. I've seen really young students naturally playing with things that start to teach them about physics and acceleration, and that's just happening because of the resources that we have outside, and they're things that the children can come and bring. They can bring to water, they can start rolling balls up and down them, and then they're starting to learn things in this play-based way. I think my suggestion for teachers would be also having something in the classroom that you could just grab. For example, I would just have a whole bank of clipboards. When the learning opportunity comes out and you realise, actually, this is a teachable moment outdoors, you've got the opportunity to just take the clipboards and the paper and take them out there. And I know that schools, we all have to have these risk assessments, and excursions are a lot of pre-planning. But actually, if you are able to teach in an environment where you've got an urban outdoor space, that's a perfect opportunity to just take them out and look at something. And we would have a typical risk assessment that would be in our local area, so the teachers could pick and choose when they wanted to take them to those spaces. So my advice is, in the planning part of the teaching and learning, is to always include outdoors in that, and make sure you have a bank of resources that can facilitate that learning happening out there anyway.
I love that. Other people on the panel, I'm curious as to your thoughts, specifically James, the type of resources that encourages outdoor collaborative learning in the school environment.
Well, it's interesting what Catriona was just saying about resources. I mean, we're always trying to make things easier, not more difficult, right, because it's difficult enough as it is. But there are some fantastic and attractive cupboards, outdoor cupboards that are available. Translucent doors so that students can actually see what's in them. So we've given them agency and autonomy so that actually they know that they can go and get stuff. They can open it up, it's shallow, therefore you can see what's in it. And so there are some really imaginative solutions out there. It's just sometimes a case of going out and finding them and discovering them. We know that sometimes you need to go out. Catriona was talking about clipboards. Sometimes you do need to go out and do some data recording, for example. Sometimes you do need something, and there's some great things such as this. That's a very simple piece of plastic that I can just sit on, and now all of a sudden I've got a hard work surface. We know that we don't want students. Tim will tell us about how we don't want students to feel worried about anything, that, oh, how am I going to do this? And so again, it's coming back to, let's make it easy for them. And if it's easy for them, there's then no lack of concentration. There's no opportunity for them to be taken off task at any point because they're trying to figure something out. So dispersed resources as well around, as opposed to, again, having everything very, very close. These little cupboards, having them around. Stephen was talking about having these different zones, and so we have our math resources in one area, we have construction resources in a different area, so we don't have these bottlenecks, we don't have lots of people trying to come to the same point, or heaven forbid, 30 children trying to cram into a shed to find something that's underneath the basketballs at the back, which somebody else has tipped over. It just requires a little bit of thought about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and come back to make it simple.
Yeah, and James, it's worth saying a couple of words about ownership here. I mean, teachers watching this are going to say, oh, Lord, now I've got to look after the basketball set, all the plants in the classroom, 110 new things I never... give the task to the children. When we do the plants in the classroom, the children have his BYOP, bring your own plant. They have a name on the plant. Here's Matilda, the money plant or whatever. They try out different nutrients with it, and they build little stem self-watering things outside. Who's looking after the timing clock for the running around? Who's looking after the number trees? They put up these lovely number trees where every branch there's a reason why. And why are those numbers on that branch? Because they're prime numbers. Somebody looks after all that stuff. It's the kids. The kids love to have agency for that. They love to have ownership of that. They love to have the responsibility that comes with it. Really, really, really important.
All right, Tim, I'm sure you have some interesting things on what Catriona said about situational learning. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so, what she was talking about when she was talking about naturally learning maths outdoors and so on is very sort of the nature of learning, because learning in classrooms is a fairly modern concept for humans, right? It's not where we were designed to learn. You learn best in the environment where you actually apply the learning. And it's a fairly old idea from psychology that with situational learning, if you test kids in an environment where they learnt some information, you'll get much stronger results from them than you do if you test them in an alien environment. And I mean, so if you're literally training kids to pass written tests, then yeah, sure, keep them in the classroom. But if you actually want them to learn stuff that they can use and apply in the real world, let them learn it out in the real world.
Perfect, yes. It's interesting. My son, from very, very early age, grade 1, all the way up until now he's 18, he's been in the Boy Scouts. And part of the Scouts is being outside. When we go out and we recruit and try to get other Scouts to join it, one of the first questions we ask them is, do you like to be outside? And throughout his life growing up, he would always have his friends ask him, how did you learn that? How do you know that? And all these additional skills that he had because he was outside, he was camping, he was in the environment, he would learn new ways and plants and the sky, the stars, all these different things. So it really lends itself well to your thoughts there. I mean, I experienced it firsthand with my own son and the additional learning that takes place just being outside and being a part of nature in so many different ways. It just really, really connects. It's like a different level of learning. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's on-the-job training for life.
Yes, on-the-job training for life. That is it. Absolutely. 100%.
A little anecdote just to fit in there, Steve, is I used to run our local scout group, and we went on a bushcraft camp, and it was a fantastic resource to the extent that they had a crashed aeroplane in the middle of this forest. Now, the kid who ran the first aid part of that now is a trained paramedic. It literally was something that ignited within him, and that's it. It's
yeah, it does.
And kids,
absolutely
listen, kids.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
And kids know this stuff. I mean, I was lucky enough to be involved in the Cayman Islands rebuilding the schools after Hurricane Ivan came along and blew all the schools down, and the kids for a couple of years just had to learn in the spaces that were available, in car parks and all over. And of course, when we came to redesign the schools, the kids were a big part of the design process. We said to the kids, "What do you want?" And they said, "We don't really care, just don't put us back in our boxes." It was a really clear phrase. And I guess if all learning was out of doors and somebody came along and said, "You know what, we could do this better in a box," you'd struggle to make the case. You really would.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when we are learning in a box, what do we want to do? Open the windows, give us sunlight. When people are looking for houses, how much sunlight comes in? How do we get the outdoors into what it is that we're doing? Wow. Hey, thank you for those fantastic, amazing insights, gang. That feels like a great place to wrap up our discussion on this part. And for our next section, we're going to be exploring more practical ways to overcome those outdoor learning barriers that we may have. All right, we're talking about some of the challenges that come with going outdoors and practical ways that we can overcome those challenges. So I'm coming to you, Dr. Tim. I know you've done a lot of research that will be extremely valuable to our viewers. What have you experienced to be some of the challenges when taking the learning outdoors?
Yeah, well, I think we've already heard some of them, and certainly some of the apprehensions that teachers might have also about taking learning outdoors. So things like being able to maintain a reasonable degree of control of the class. We talked about weather conditions, and I think Steve said earlier that there's no such thing as bad weather, that there's just a bad clothing, basically. And we also saw the issue with having the right tools in the environment to support the learning, things to lean on when you're writing and so on, all that kind of stuff. And I think this highlights some of the points around taking learning outdoors, because there's a whole messy world out there that is potentially quite difficult to prepare for sometimes when you go out. One of the first things that will typically happen with any class when they go outside, if you take them to an environment that's not super familiar to them, then you're going to have a period where actually they're busy learning about the environment. They're not really learning about the lesson that you want to teach them in that environment. So there'll be a lot of focus of the attention on the world that they've just entered. This will also typically result in some increased sort of socialization, right? It's a safety in numbers kind of thing that plays out, where the kids will actually talk to each other more, and they will form allegiances, and all of this kind of bonding will go on to feel safe in this new environment that they find themselves in. So I think from a teaching perspective, it makes sense to accept that this is going to happen. Don't consider it as a failing or as a weakness of anything. It's just a matter of fact. It's the way that we've evolved to be, and so allow it to play out before you try and do the teaching. Otherwise, it's going to get super frustrating. And I was out with a class a few months ago, and we were doing some planting of trees for an endangered squirrel population in our village, and the first few minutes was just a lot of excitement, a lot of running around, a lot of learning about just how muddy it was today, and how slippy the floor was, and so on, and people forming their little groups. That had to happen, and then we could have the lesson about, well, this is how you actually plant the tree. This is sort of why we're doing this. This is what the squirrels need, and so on. So I think it's just understanding that this will happen and not being afraid of it, I think.
Yeah, I think that the part of it is also is from the teacher's perspective, you have to plan, and part of that planning is, take in the space. Take a second, take a minute, give them the opportunity to check out the space, learn the space, have that feeling in there so that you can then go forward and do what is necessary in the space. As you say that, I'm starting to feel things myself, when you go to a new spot or a new place and you got to check it out a little bit, see where it is that you are, take in your environment. That makes a lot of sense. I like that.
Steve, you have to leave room for curiosity as well. That's really important. And, a lot of the prepared lessons in classes, we know where they're going to get to, we know what they're going to do. You take them out of doors, they discover things you weren't expecting. In the classroom, learning is kind of, you're on a track and you pretty much know where it's going to go. Outside, you've got to leave room for curiosity, but curiosity is the value, and when you get it back, then there's a challenge for the teacher. Think about how do you curate those experiences. Saying to next year's kids, well, last year they found baby jellyfish. That's not the way to do it. Leave the space, let them discover. Give them a scientific method, give them the little tools to let them look around, but leave space for curiosity, and you won't be disappointed.
James, with your insight, which resources, furnitures are designed, to overcome some of these challenges with your expertise?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just listening to Tim, it's whenever we change something anywhere, we notice that, of course, children will immediately start to question it and be curious. And so when we do that inside, it's the same. If we put them on wobble stools, if we put them on chairs with wheels, there's always this nervousness that actually they will spin around. They will do something that you weren't expecting them to do. And yes, of course they will do. We will do. Trust me, I have a new electric car, and I'm doing all sorts of things that I will get used to, and then we'll never do again. That's just our nature. I mean, in terms of actually practically outside, it's a case of trying to think of the landscape as our friend, consider it as part of the environment, the learning environment, and to therefore create specific spaces within it that will do certain things. And the two natural ones, I guess, are shelters. Now, I was brought up on a farm on Exmoor, and so to me a shelter was absolutely a bushcraft thing that we would go out and build. But you sort of recognise that's perhaps not necessarily the most practical thing on a daily basis in a school. Over the pandemic, where there was a lot of outdoor learning, we worked with an architectural practice called O'Donnell Brown to develop a studio system which just gave shelter from absolute extremes of weather. So rain, the reality is we're not going to go outside and probably do a math test in the middle of a rainstorm. But ultimately, it's nice just sometimes to have those types of spaces that we can retreat to. And it's a bit of a halfway house as well, because again, if there's any nervousness about actually doing any of this, it's starting to be, well, we'll go out into the outdoor classroom, despite the fact that feels a bit of an anathema. And the other one is, and a space that a lot of people are recreating outside, which are outdoor amphitheatres, external amphitheatres, so to cutting terraces into landscapes. There's a fantastic one. I was reading a book by Prakash Nair recently about biophilia, and there's a fantastic one at Swarthmere College in Pennsylvania, which is gorgeous. There's some lovely ones in the American Embassy School in Delhi, and they're both very, very different. One's very hard, one is very soft. I was brought up, in Devon. Dartington Hall has these beautiful terraces which create natural amphitheatres, and so it's using the landscape to create those types of spaces for you, but also zoning, because we're taking that bit that we understand about successful learning environments, of zoning, of having different areas for different things, so students understand that, and they are designed and built in that way. Some of it is landscaping. I mean, we're looking at ways in which, therefore, we can start to build some of those things as off-the-shelf units, because we recognise not all schools will have that opportunity. Not everybody has got fantastic land and grounds which they can cut into an amphitheatre, for example.
A wonderful example with that, and I love a good amphitheater. You see it, you can imagine all the people there, how it can be used, the presentation that can take place there, the communication. Excellent example. Catriona, what practical solutions would you like to share as supporting and overcoming some of those challenges that we've discussed with what you've experienced?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to hear James talk about the amphitheatre, because we have one just outdoors here, and I was just thinking about all of the incredible experiences that they create for the students, particularly when you think about voice projection, and you can ask people to sit in different places in the amphitheatre, and to get the students to think about their presentation skills, even if they won't be doing it outdoors in an amphitheatre in the future. I mentioned it previously that it was this idea of having the outdoor learning sort of carved into your planning, and into your curricular week, if you like. And I think for practitioners that are maybe in a more urban setting, and don't necessarily have the range of sort of expansive nature that we probably conjure an image up of when we talk about these things. One thing that's really worked in a few cities that I lived in and worked in was actually going off site and finding where are our local spots that are a good space for us to take children to just get that movement, get that learning outdoors, get that experience of being there. That's one option. Another option that we found to be really handy in other schools is doing a sort of nature-based week, and taking natural resources outdoors and having that moment of that week to be expressive and to be outdoors in nature, and to take the learning experiences out there. That again is dependent on what the school's expectations are, or whether or not that would be possible. And then I think when you think about this idea of what I think both Tim and Stephen mentioned it in the studio, this idea of there's not one thing, it's only bad clothing, there's never bad weather. I think it's about trying to change the mindset of everybody. So parents, teachers. I don't love being outdoors on the rain on duty, but actually when I see the learning opportunities that the children get through, like, play with puddles and looking at how different textures change when they're wet, that makes it, and as an outdoor educator, I really feel that the children are learning something from that experience. So change your clothing is probably my first tip, but change your mindsets. And also look at this idea of risk. Are we being too risk averse as adults? We also let children climb trees outside here, and the children are able to manage their own risk when they're in that experience. They can figure out, when they're going too high. And even though as an educator, as a practitioner, you might look at it and think, oh, and other adults in the environment also definitely feel that way. So it's about changing people's mindsets and changing that idea of risk, but also being inclusive about the learners that you do have. So we might not have students who are all able to manage that sort of experience, and being able to give all of our learners an experience that gives them an opportunity to be at one with nature is important. So looking at levels, if you don't have a space where you've always got resources outdoors and available, if you've got things that you take in and out, making sure that every child that we have can access that in a fair way, I think is important too.
And being a school leader, I mean, I was a school principal for many, many years. A big piece of that, making everybody kind of come into the fold of that, is the management of it. You got to plan. Think about where you, especially in the urban situation, where are great places to go? How can you get there safely? How can you get them back safely? How much time do you need to be out there? What is, so as much as, we love to be outside and stuff, there is the practical management of it as well. I think earlier on you had mentioned something about an outline or a format that you have in order to take kids out. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we have what we call a field trip bank. So for example, this is somewhere where it's very close proximity to the school, and we've assessed the risk. So we've done the risk assessment, we've done the walk, we've done the journey, we've figured out how long it would take us with speedier learners who tend to be the old ones, how long it actually physically takes with the younger learners who tend to walk slower. Do we need to take snacks? And so we have this bank, if you like, of local places that we can just rotate on going on. And I think that actually, instead of having quite often schools will send a letter to say, we're going to go on this trip, please sign the form and give your consent. parents at the beginning of the year would generally consent to going to those places, and then the teachers are free to do that and weave that into their planning every term. So that's, again, quite a practical way of supporting opportunities outside. And through project-based learning as well, there's also an opportunity to not forget about the local community. So even though we're focusing predominantly on the outdoors, it could be a trip on, like, through the outdoors that goes to somewhere that really relates and connects the learning to the community. So that would be like another field trip bank that we might have. So outdoors and also community based.
Yeah, we're going to look at some examples of that a little bit later. But it's also, Steve, it's really important to keep a sense of perspective. You know, people with the kind of health and safety hat on, they become kind of a little bit obsessed with their own context. And when you look around the world, what we're doing now, we're chatting halfway around the world, perfectly normal for everybody this side of the pandemic. You know, those kids in Silkeborg in Denmark who climb trees, and they're up 30, 40 foot. They're really up and high, you know. And when I first saw this, I took a photograph and said, you know, wow. And they said, why are you taking a photograph? I said, well, because there are some schools around the world that would be surprised to see this. And they looked astonished. They said, well, but there are trees everywhere. If we didn't teach the kids to climb trees, think of the danger they'd be in. You know, so they see the whole act of learning outdoors as being protecting the children against the dangers of outdoor, which many of us did with bicycles. You know, we taught them to ride bicycles safely before we sent them off on them. And you know, when you look around 2.2 billion children around the world, a lot of them have the most horrendous journeys to school. You know, I'm doing work in Southeast Asia. The kids, to get to school, they have to get across the river. They get into an inflatable lorry in a tube. It swings across the river on a bit of string. They get out, they swing back. Well, I'll tell you what, you try doing that. You try modeling that. You think of the physics, think of the maths, think of the teamwork. So looking at other kids' journeys to school, modeling them yourself, you know, building that empathy with their experience is good. But I'll tell you what, the maths and the science and the physics and the excitement, because there are bad things in the river, not just you in the lorry in a tube, you know, that's all part of it. And sad sometimes, you see kids have these amazing journeys to school. They arrive at school, they kind of dust off all that, get on with learning about glacial scenery or something in the middle of Cambodia. Then this horrendous journey back. The journey was the learning experience. And so bringing that in to the classroom really mattered. James and I have been doing work with building learning for some of our Olympic teams. And they never wanted to go into the classroom to learn the stuff about, you know, penalty corners or whatever. Until out on the pitch, they went for a thing called Thinking Thursdays, where every Thursday the whole pitch was different. You know, you'd arrive and the goals, instead of being on the ends, were on the side, so you got a wide, short pitch. The minute that started happening, they wanted to get back into a learning space to learn the detail to take back outside. So this is a virtual circle. You know, this is stimulating their engagement and their curiosity and their learning, and the outdoor feeds the indoor and the indoor feeds the outdoor, and it's all better than the single mode we used to do.
There you go. Excellent. Thank you. Well, hey, thank you again for all of your fantastic, amazing insights and practical takeaways. Now, for the last part of this webinar, I'd like to take a look to the future and think about what opportunities and ideas we can share to inspire our viewers' approaches to outdoor learning. Opportunities and ideas. That's what we're going to be hitting in our last section here. I think this would be a great part for you, our panelists, to share examples of taking outdoor teaching beyond the school gates. All right, so we're going to jump into Stephen and Tim. You guys can wrestle this one out together, if you will. What examples do you have for going beyond the fixed outdoor teaching space? And what benefits does that bring to children's learning?
Well, I've got a lovely little example in Madrid. We've got this lovely school, Santa Isabel School. Jem Pro's the head, and it's a very vertical school. So it's, you know, it's bounded on both sides by shops and buildings. There's the front door opens onto the street. The only play space is right up on the roof on the 8th floor. So the kind of question is, how do you give those kids, an outdoor experience when there is no outdoor in the school at all? And the answer has been absolutely gorgeous. So they've crafted what they call learning journeys. And the learning journeys are all around the centre of Madrid. So they've gone from being a little school with a tiny footprint to having this wonderful campus, which is the middle of Madrid. So how have they done it? Well, they've done it in 3 ways. First of all, teachers have worked out what those learning journeys might be. They've all got a curriculum focus. There's a huge chart up in the foyer, maps them all out. The colours from those come right back into the school. So if you've been on the art journey, it leads you right back to the art room and so on. At the end of each journey are parents or the local community, and they're saying, let's show you what we do in the Danish embassy. Let's show you what we do making pasta. Let's show you what we do with furniture making. But on the way, there's a whole lot of little activities and little moments. And when you see these tiny kids, walking right through the middle of Madrid, walking in twos, they would look after each other. And then you realize that looking out of the windows, in the front door, in the shop foyers, there's somebody looking after them. So the eyes of Madrid are on these kids as they walk around the middle. One of the journeys, they arrive at a jazz workshop. So there's a bunch of pretty keen little jazz musicians, and they play some pretty good music. The kids adore it. So they say, we'll put on a concert in the middle of town. So that little jazz combo, you're suddenly in the middle of town, the kids arrive, sit all around, and of course people gather around them. And what's exciting about all this is the community are now part of the whole thing. It's gone from being a place with a place for learning to a place of learning. The whole community is now all over learning. One of my joys at the first couple of months this had been going was arriving on a Saturday, finding the kids all lined up outside the school with their clipboards, taking their parents on the learning journey, because let's show you what we've learned on the way. And I think if you look, what's happened here is all the walls around learning have got softer and lower.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. Dr. Tim, what are your thoughts on this?
I wish I had some stories to tell like that one. But what it really highlights to me is a real opportunity with outdoor learning, which is that it's a chance to help children to learn about the process of learning, actually in the world. We sort of talk about attention and trying to maintain it, and in a classroom where a teacher is delivering content, there's a natural focus for that attention, and distraction can be very controlled. Out in the real world, that's very much not the case. Distraction is happening all around, and a core skill for life is actually learning to manage distraction, to focus attention, and there's an opportunity there, I think, to use this kind of learning as a way to help people to understand why that's important, help people to understand what kind of techniques they can use to do that. We know when attention is divided that learning is normally impaired. So you will get compromised education from divided attention. So actually, helping the kids to understand that and to reflect on the process of actively learning in the environment rather than sort of passively learning in the classroom can be very different, I think, and I think there's a real opportunity there to bring that out.
There's a multiplier. I've put PhD students into communities where we've given the kids a lot of technology for their learning, and their learning spilling out all over the place. And we were worried, are we building a barrier between parents who maybe in the context of the example didn't have great education, didn't have great technology skills. Suddenly here comes your daughter connected to the world full of, hey mum, let's talk about quantum physics. Were we building a barrier there? Exactly the opposite was what was happening. The children's delight in their learning was caught by, infected the parents who said, when the kids went to bed, here, I'm having some of that. They kind of picked up the technology. Technology is a key enabler in all this. Technology has made the difference. Technology isn't just a screen you sit in front of in the classroom. It's stuff in your pockets you take with you, Internet of the Things, stuff that's on your wrist. All of that is a multiplier. And it turned out the parents went faster because the kids were loving their learning. And by the way, talking about it when they got home. And the kids went faster because their parents were doing so. Everybody gained. And that, why wouldn't we want some of that?
Yeah.
And the only way you get that is by putting learning into the community as well as in the little boxes we built.
Beautiful. That's it. And the great thing about that, putting the learning into community, and the example that you shared is the partnership. We always talk about, we want community partnerships. We want to connect. That's how that can happen. Having those community partnerships, I'm sure all throughout the city of Madrid, they're all looking out for the kids. They're all being aware of them. It's not just the teacher there, but the whole community is aware of who they are, what they're doing, and it makes it such a more enriching experience for them in many ways. Catriona, I wanted to jump over to something that you're familiar with, makerspace shipping containers. Makerspace shipping containers. Can you talk us through what that concept is and the benefits on the children's opportunities?
Sure, yeah, actually, it does relate back to this idea of the community being involved in the projects. So where we're learning at Real School, it's a project-based learning environment. And we acquired a shipping container, like one of these like empty spaces, vessels that we were allowed to put near the school, which theoretically could be an extension of the learning. And at the moment, it's still in process. It's like a big empty box. And so, there was loads of excited adults, me included, being like, oh, what are we going to put in here? How are we going to make this such an amazing space for the learners? And then I think it was our founder said, well, have we asked the founders, or have we asked the students? Have we asked the learners, are they involved in the process? So we were doing a project that already focused on biomimicry, and now we're basically trying to focus the question back to how can biomimicry support us with a problem in the learning environment or a challenge that we might need to solve. And one of those things is this makerspace. So the idea of the community coming in is we would get local artists, local designers, local people within the community who have a skill that will give that to the students. So theoretically, in the future, it will have lots of resources that are available for the students to make and really create a solid and decent product with the support and the help of a local artist or designer or somebody who has a skill set within that avenue that they're working in. So I think as a primary teacher, we also have this idea of, we have to be able to teach everything. And actually, we could completely expand our network if we were able to link in with people in our community to come on in and actually, could you share this skill with the kids? And then we have learning exhibitions at the end of our sort of 6 or 7 week cycle. And then we would invite those people back so that they could see the process, how do you think that the student is actually done with this, and what could they improve, and the review process is also really important to discuss with the learners. I love what you've done with this, I really like how you've taken this idea and you've made this is something that we could improve together. And parents are involved in that review process, educators are involved with that. So the dialogue is super important, but the people from the community are the most sort of the heart piece of that.
Definitely. I love that connection again with the community, bringing them in, making a part of it. What ideas do they have? And the kids look up to them. They can look up to seeing look, this is a viable career, a viable person who can really connect with us. That's wonderful. James, I'm curious with your expertise in the development of furniture and resources, what are those opportunities that can happen through that lens?
Well, I mean, there's an enormous focus clearly at the moment on well-being as well. And one of the things that is clear to us is the use of the outdoors is a fantastic enabler, if you like, of the creation of well-being spaces. So we're looking at sensory spaces, we're looking at sensory gardens, we're looking at sensory gardens linked to well-being rooms. Latest issue of our Create magazine, we went and talked to Maggie's, who is a cancer charity here in the UK, and they use the outdoor spaces. They build centres in hospitals where the outdoor spaces are as an intrinsic a space for curative and relaxation as the indoor spaces are. And so we talked to them and we said, they absolutely feel that environments affect how you feel, how you respond to these things. And a combination of that, Stephen and I have been working on planting, the types of planting that we use. There's a fantastic, here in the UK, there's a website from the Horticultural Traders Association, which actually tells you the toxicity of plants, because we're very aware that clearly there are things that, there are there's plants that have specific values to us, lavender, rosemary, etc. A lot of the herbs will have sensory things, but there's also sound, there's all sorts of different stimuli, if you like. With those spaces, but we need to be safe. But we also need to think sometimes about mechanical injury or the potential of mechanical injury. We did actually on our list of plants that we tend to put into schools, into indoor spaces, we did include aloe vera, but it was one of those that we sort of sat there because they have very sharp, the ends of an aloe vera are very sharp, and so you just need to be aware of those things. But that comes back to the risk taking. It comes back to actually, should we not be teaching children or giving them opportunities to understand? As long as it's managed, these things are fine and dandy. And Gary Spracklin, who's a head teacher down in a lovely school down in Dorset, absolutely will always sit there and say that the outside is as important as the inside. He uses, a landscape resource rather than actually an equipment-based environment. And so is again creating those spaces, using, there's wonderful messages, isn't there, from Catriona's reuse of a 40-foot shipping container, which has a big environmental impact on it. All of these things just seem to me so intertwined that in many respects we're just sat there just looking for those next opportunities. Trust me, you go down to Gary's school, you won't only see a shipping container, but you'll see a boat, you'll see a teepee, you'll see other types of spaces. I think there's 2 yachts down there, in fact, that he's used as just as old pieces of equipment that have reached the end of their life. We're doing a big project in Singapore at the moment with Dulwich College. And again, we're looking at one of those floors, we're looking very specifically at how we reuse materials and upcycle materials. And so we've got so much embedded learning into that. And I don't know, just the opportunities to me just are enormous.
There's so many opportunities. Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, hey, gang. Hey, I want to thank you guys for your thoughts on future opportunities and the ideas for our listeners to take away. And I really can't believe that we reached the end of today's discussion. I want to say a big thank you to our viewers for joining us for this TTS Talking webinar and outdoor learning environments. We hope that you had found this session extremely valuable and inspiring, and that you have some insightful pieces of information to take away and put into practice. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to our wonderful panel, Professor Stephen Heppell, Dr. Tim Holmes, Catriona Woodward, and James Clarke. We thank you for your valuable insights, your guidance on this specific topic. For more information on this topic, head over to TTS World of Education Content Hub, liked on the screen below. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.